In the summer heat of 79 AD, beneath the deafening chaos of Rome's most feared arena, a young woman named Sabina waited in a cell so dark she could not even see her own hands. She was 19, a Dean girl stripped of her homeland, her family, and the life she once imagined. Above her, tens of thousands of Romans stamped their feet on the wooden benches, their cheers rolling down like thunder. They were celebrating the same man who had slaughtered her brothers only moments earlier. She could still hear the echo of the crowd's approval, an echo that reminded her that Rome treated grief as entertainment. What would unfold down in those underground chambers over the next 3 hours would one day become one of the empire's most fiercely censored rituals. A practice so grotesque that even Rome's own chroniclers hesitated to describe it. Some debated whether writing it down would stain the empire's legacy forever. Others insisted it should never be spoken of at all. Yet it happened, again and again and again. Locked behind gates where no one but guards, handlers and victorious fighters could enter. Before anyone dives into what these secret rooms were used for, it's worth asking a simple question. Have you ever wondered what the arena hid once the spectators went home? Rome presented the Colosseum as a stage for heroism. But the walls remembered far more than the roar of battles. They remembered what the empire preferred buried. If this story pulls you in, you already understand why Rome spent centuries trying to erase certain details from its records. The accounts you're about to hear come from Cassius Dio, from archaeological discoveries made beneath the Colosseum in 2018, and from internal Senate documents stored deep within the Vatican's archive. These aren't legends whispered in taverns. They were state-sanctioned realities, classified as entertainment, yet constructed with the same precision Rome used in its wars. The Colosseum, recently completed in 80 AD, wasn't meant to be just an amphitheatre. It was a declaration carved into stone. It stood tall enough to intimidate entire nations and vast enough to swallow armies whole. Those who stepped inside instantly smelled metal, sweat, damp stone, and the musk of caged animals waiting for release. The surface of the arena looked like a simple sand floor, but the sand had a purpose, absorbing the blood that spilled by the gallon. Underneath that sand stretched a labyrinth of wooden lifts, rope systems, barred cages, storage chambers, and holding pits. This hidden underground world was where Rome kept what it valued most: exotic beasts, prisoners of war, condemned criminals, and a rotating roster of enslaved fighters. Those tunnels also served another purpose, one far less discussed. To Romans, the games weren't merely diversions. Every fight was a message, a reminder of who held power and who did not, a spectacle combining religion, intimidation, punishment, and political advertisement. When General Marcus Antonius crushed the Dean rebellion in 78 AD, he didn't return to Rome with only gold and supplies. He marched back with 847 captives. Among them were 124 high-ranking women, leaders, daughters of chiefs, priestesses, warriors, wives of clan heads. People whose capture carried symbolic weight. Rome didn't need to kill these women. Killing them would have been merciful. Rome wanted something else entirely, to demonstrate to every conquered nation that even their noblest bloodlines meant nothing now. Their bodies, their honor, their lineage, all belonged to Rome. That was the message. One of those women was Sabina. Elsewhere in the arena, the man the crowd adored, Gaius Valerius Maximus, was preparing for his reward. He was a towering 32-year-old gladiator, almost 6 feet tall, a rare height for Rome. His skin bore the story of years in the arena, scars from blades, gashes from claws, burns from training mishaps. Each mark testified to a bout survived and another corpse left behind. Born enslaved after his father died in debt prison, he had spent 14 punishing years fighting for his life and for the faint promise of freedom. He had killed 89 men in sanctioned combat. His only dream was to someday earn the rudies, the wooden sword that meant liberation. His greatest fear was the opposite: dying nameless and being hauled away on hooks like countless forgotten fighters. But this afternoon, in front of Emperor Titus himself, Gaius defeated the Dean champion. The crowd erupted, and with victory came the standard rewards: a purse of 500 denarii, a wreath of laurel leaves, and something far darker, the privilege of selecting a woman from the captured prisoners. So, Sabina stood among 17 other women in the holding chamber when a guard informed her she had been chosen. She did not fully grasp what that choice meant. Her village had been burned months earlier. Her fiancé, Disabilis, had been cut down by Roman soldiers before she was taken. She had already lost everything. What she hoped for now was a quick end. What she feared was the kind of fate that left no part of a person intact. She would soon learn that Rome's definition of mercy was far more terrifying than its cruelty. Rome didn't destroy a culture only by killing its warriors. It broke them by desecrating what they held sacred: family lines, religious roles, and the safety of their women. This was psychological warfare, engineered intentionally. Every humiliation inflicted on captives sent a message across the empire. Resisting Rome was not just fatal, it was hopeless. Losing to Rome meant surrendering more than territory, it meant surrendering everything. What happened that afternoon would become so infamous that Roman lawmakers would soon be dragged into the matter. As the sun slid across the sky and the arena's bloody sand darkened under lengthening shadows, the overseer of the games made his way into the hypogeum, the sprawling underground system beneath the Colosseum. The passageways smelled of wet stone, torch smoke, sweat and fear, sweat and fear. He carried with him a bronze plaque, the official roster of spoils for that day's victor. When he reached Gaius Valerius Maximus, the gladiator's hands still trembled from the combat he'd survived moments earlier. His lungs burned, his heartbeat was violent in his chest, the remnants of adrenaline still raging through him. The emperor acknowledges your triumph, the official declared mechanically, reciting a line spoken countless times before. By imperial decree, you are entitled to choose your ward. Select your due. No one standing in that dim corridor realized that this routine procedure, one carried out after hundreds of fights, would erupt into a political storm that would reach the Senate within mere weeks. The tablet listed each reward in neat lines: coins, a ration of high-quality wine, a night sleeping on a real mattress instead of the wooden barracks, or the option Rome called Victoria Carnalis, flesh as compensation. For a man who possessed nothing, who could be beaten or killed at any moment, and whose entire existence hung on the whims of crowds, it was one of the rare moments he held any power. Roman society didn't just tolerate such privileges, it celebrated them. In the empire's worldview, conquest justified access. The defeated existed to serve the conqueror, a principle Rome had perfected through centuries of expansion. While Gaius deliberated over his choices, preparations were taking place elsewhere in the arena, preparations the public never saw. In the women's enclosure, guards entered with buckets of cold water, not for drinking, for cleaning. The prisoners were washed, their tangled hair pulled straight, their torn garments exchanged for plain tunics. Sabina watched as attendants examined each woman, noting details on wax tablets with practiced detachment. Beside her, an older woman, Xemoxis, once a priestess of the Dean's Sun Temple, leaned in with a voice that barely rose above a whisper. "This is not grooming," she murmured. "This is sorting. Either for the spectacle, or for the aftermath." The words sank into Sabina like stone. Meanwhile, in another section of the arena, workers were assembling something far more sinister. A setup that would twist a standard display of domination into an outrage that historians would later argue over for generations. Unsolved. Above, all 50,000 seats of the Colosseum were nearly full again, the crowd eager for the afternoon's side performances. These interludes weren't minor distractions, they were carefully staged productions, fake hunts, choreographed skirmishes, and reenactments of myths where condemned prisoners died, acting out the tragic end. But today, something new was added. A theatrical reminder of Roman supremacy over the people they labelled barbarians. 20 Dean women were strapped onto the platform of the arena's lift system, a mechanical network designed to send animals, fighters, and props surging upward through hidden doors. Sabina rose into a blinding burst of sunlight and a wall of noise so overwhelming, it felt physical. The heat scorched her skin. The smells collided, sweet roasted meat from vendors, heavy perfumes wafting from the elite seats, and beneath everything, the metallic stench of dried blood baked into the sand. What should have been a simple execution was being redesigned into humiliation. The women were pushed into a line as a herald shouted their supposed crimes. Rebellion aiding enemies, rejecting Roman deities. Then came the cruelty disguised as entertainment. They were told they would fight each other, paired off, armed with wooden swords, clothed in shredded rags meant to provoke laughter. The victors would be handed over to Roman champions. The ones who fell would die on the spot. If this deliberate construction of suffering shocks you, it should, because it wasn't random. This was Roman policy in action. Wooden swords were distributed. Sabina felt the rough, splintering grain dig into her palm. Across from her stood Kamasikas, the sister of Disabilis, her slain fiancé. This was the woman who had once braided her hair, who had sung during her engagement feast, who had shared hopes of the future with her. Now Rome wanted them to destroy each other. Their eyes met. Both froze. The crowd erupted with expectation, but when nothing happened, excitement slipped into irritation, then fury. A fight, spectators roared. Hands hurled olive pits, scraps of bread, bits of fruit, anything they could grab. Insults followed, spat with venom, barbarians, cowards, garbage, garbage. Yet neither woman raised her sword. Neither took a step. Their refusal was the last piece of defiance they still controlled. The only protest left to them in a world determined to strip everything else away. For a minute and a half, the strongest empire the world had ever seen was silently challenged by two exhausted, unarmed women who simply refused to lift their weapons. That frozen defiance shattered the illusion of Rome's control, and the moment it became clear the crowd wouldn't get its spectacle, guards stormed the arena floor. The staged performance instantly collapsed into raw violence. Kamasikas was struck down with the flat of a blade, her body dropping hard onto the sand as laughter and cheers rolled from the stands. Sabina cried out and lunged toward her, letting her wooden sword fall. Both women were seized, not to be executed, but to be redirected toward something the audience found equally thrilling. Below the arena, the machine of Roman exploitation continued without the slightest pause. A scribe scratched a brief note into the day's record. 20 female captives of Dean origin processed for post-victory distribution. Beneath that, another line appeared. 2 resistors reassigned to private chambers for exclusive victor access. In Rome's system, human beings were categorized like livestock, each reduced to an item, waiting to be claimed. Sabina and Kamasikas were separated, pulled into different rooms, small, stone compartments fitted with benches, iron rings, and heavy doors that locked only from the outside. Their cleanliness made them more disturbing. Nothing inside was accidental. These spaces existed for a purpose, designed with the same intention as the cages for lions or the platforms for gladiators rising to the arena. Around the 4th hour, Gaius Valerius Maximus stepped into Sabina's chamber. He was still wearing his armor, another man's blood dried across his torso. Tiuzo. Sabina pressed herself against the far wall, silent and drained, with no way to resist. In that moment, every Roman law stood on his side. She had no rights, no defense, and no identity beyond what the state labeled her to be. Spoils earned by violence. We do not know what thoughts filled his mind. The records give us nothing of his conscience. All that survives is a clerk's unemotional summary. But then something happened that no one expected. Gaius removed his helmet, laid his sword aside, and sat down with his head bowed. For several minutes, he said nothing at all. Sabina waited, bracing for the brutality she believed was coming, but the assault never began. When he finally spoke, it was in broken Dean, a language pieced together from years of fighting men taken from her homeland. He asked for the name of the man she had seen die. She answered. "So Onvie," she answered. He asked about the one she had lost months before. In return, he spoke of his father's execution, of the years that shaped him into Rome's weapon and Rome's captive. Their exchange continued for 2 hours. Guards walked past twice, heard voices, assumed obedience, and moved on. At last, he made a decision Rome would not tolerate. Calling to the guard, he declared Sabina infected and unfit for allocation. The deception was clumsy, but rejecting a captive on health grounds required no debate. She was transferred to the medical ward, where 3 days later, she died of an infection common in Roman prisons. Gaius never saw her again. He fought twice more that month, winning both matches, rejecting both rewards, and quietly stepping into the moment from which there was no return. On the 15th of September in 79 AD, a tense silence settled over the Senate chamber as Senator Quintus Aurelius Semicus stepped forward carrying a complaint that should have been insignificant. His young nephew, a barely trained gladiator, had been beaten by his instructor after refusing the traditional reward that followed a victory. The boy claimed he was following the example set by Maximus. The trainer claimed he was correcting disobedience and preserving Roman ideals. On its surface, it was the kind of dispute that normally never reached the Senate floor. But this one forced Rome's elite to confront a subject everyone understood, yet deliberately avoided acknowledging. The surviving Senate summaries refer to the matter only vaguely, describing a discussion about the improper handling of defeated female captives. That bland phrase hides what truly unfolded, a fierce 4-hour argument over whether Rome had crossed a moral threshold even its own rulers could not comfortably justify anymore. The conservative faction, shepherded by Senator Fabius, insisted Rome had always asserted dominance over conquered peoples in body and spirit. Our forefathers forged power through complete submission, he declared. The opposing side, shaped by Stoic philosophy and more pragmatic concerns, countered that Rome was creating symbols of resistance. A dead rebels vanish, one argued. Traumatized survivors become seeds for future uprisings. Yet morality was not what pushed the Senate toward action. It was political fear. 3 provincial governors had recently warned of rising unrest, each reporting that Rome's treatment of captive women had become fuel for rebel leaders' speeches. Instead of breaking resistance, the spectacles were stirring it. Rome's strategy was backfiring. The empire was injuring itself, and every senator in the chamber knew it. On the 1st of October, 79 AD, the Senate issued a decree later labelled by historians as the Lex Captivitas, the law of captive women. Its rules were narrow but unprecedented. Women taken in war could no longer be paraded or distributed as prizes during public spectacles. The arena could no longer stage humiliations of conquered women as entertainment. Private violations continued behind locked doors, but the state-sponsored theatrical display of such acts was banned. The enforcement was inconsistent. Many arena overseers ignored the ruling or exploited loopholes, but the principle itself was extraordinary. Even Rome admitted that some boundaries should not be crossed in daylight. Ironically, the law improved nothing for the victims. Their suffering simply moved out of sight. 3 months after this decree, Gaius Valerius Maximus finally earned the freedom he had dreamed of, not for mercy or rebellion, but for winning 5 more consecutive fights. His last known act as a free man was purchasing the liberation of a Dean woman named Camascus. Imagine Gaius realizing that all he had managed to do was give one woman a few extra days of life. No more. His refusal had not slowed the system. The machine was too vast, too profitable, too embedded in Roman identity. His gesture was a droplet vanishing into an ocean of suffering. Think of Sabina's final moments, dying from an infection that could have been prevented, surrounded by captives whose names Rome never bothered to document. No senator debated her passing. No historian recorded it. In the empire's moral accounting, her pain was too insignificant to note. The tragedy is not that Rome was cruel. Cruelty was a given in ancient warfare. The tragedy is that Rome engineered cruelty into a process, industrialized it, refined it, built infrastructure for it. Administrative forms, supply chains, architectural plans, all created to maintain a system in which human beings could vanish without leaving more than nail marks on stone. In 2018, archaeologists from the University of Rome, led by Dr. Isabella Fortunato, uncovered a forgotten section of the Eastern Hypogeum. What they found would never appear on travel guides. A row of compact rooms with iron restraints fastened into the stone. Channels carved into the floors for draining liquids. Scratches left by hands searching for escape. Broken pottery used to carry food or water. Flattened bundles of material that once served as bedding. Carbon analysis confirmed the chambers were part of the original construction from 80 AD, built deliberately, not added later. 6 bronze tags surfaced during the dig, each stamped with captiva and dated between 79 and 82 AD, the exact timeline of the Dean's suppression. Literary evidence supports these findings. Cassius Dio described allocation rooms. Seneca hinted at practices he refused to detail. Tacitus, ordinarily blunt, remained conspicuously silent, which may say more than any written condemnation. Historians still debate frequency. Some argue the ritual was rare, reserved for grand triumphs. Others point to the specialized infrastructure and abundant evidence and argue it was common. The truth likely lies in the middle. Not constant, not occasional, but practiced often enough that Rome built permanent spaces for it. Romans treated their gladiators as a strange blend of heroes and disposable performers. They were admired almost like celebrities, but with an undercurrent of danger and exploitation that shaped every part of their existence. Wealthy women slipped coins to guards just for a chance to meet them in secret. Archaeologists have found lamps, carvings, and painted walls, showing warriors posing unclothed while holding weapons, part trophy, part fantasy. Their sweat was collected and sold as a charm believed to kindle desire. Some even consumed it mixed with blood, convinced it would increase fertility. Yet the same society that elevated these men also pushed them into slaughter for entertainment and compensated them with human lives, turning victory into license. Writings from the era describe lavish gatherings after major festivals where aristocrats mingled with fighters and enslaved people, blurring lines between celebration and exploitation. Women captured during wars were displayed like trophies, sometimes forced to reenact tales involving gods like Jupiter or Mars before being handed over as gifts. Prisoners stripped during triumphal marches, victims bound to posts to imitate mythic punishments before their executions, defeated queens exhibited before generals. None of it was accidental. These acts were crafted with intent, a message hammered across continents that Rome controlled not just bodies, but fate itself. Past, present, future, everything belonged to the empire. The gladiatorial games were not improvised chaos. They were obligations, part of the muniera, duties owed to the public. Anyone hosting games wanted to draw bigger crowds, earn political favour, and surpass their rivals. The degradation of captives became a feature, not a flaw. 19th century historian Theodor Mommsen once called this Rome's most perfected engine of dehumanization. What he meant was clear: Rome conquered more than land. It conquered stories, erased identities, and consumed meaning itself. The fact that historians are still torn over how to discuss these realities shows how deeply the wounds reach. Popular culture barely touches this truth. Even the film Gladiator hints at it only faintly, allowing the darkest elements to stay in shadow. Modern scholars debate how much detail should be shared. Does describing these practices illuminate Rome's brutality, or does it risk turning horror into spectacle again? The discussion matters not to sensationalize, but because it reveals how civilizations justify cruelty under the weight of culture and tradition. Rome was not uniquely monstrous, but it perfected the art of normalizing violence, transforming suffering into ritual, turning screams into applause. The deeper lesson is unsettling. The line dividing civilization and barbarism has never been drawn by architecture or engineering, but by how those with power treat those with none. Rome built aqueducts that still inspire awe, yet beneath its grand arenas it constructed small rooms where people were harmed as casually as props. Its greatness and its moral hollowness coexisted without contradiction. Power didn't just corrupt rulers, it reshaped everyone in the system. Gaius Valerius Maximus was a victim and a tool, enslaved, trained to kill, and rewarded with authority over those even more powerless. The structure turned ordinary people into instruments of torment, persuading them that cruelty was duty and compassion was weakness. It's a warning about how societies rely on tradition to justify the unthinkable. Our ancestors did this, became Rome's permanent excuse, until habit replaced morality and atrocity became routine. And it raises questions that echo today. What buried horrors sit beneath the monuments we admire? So many famous ruins rest on foundations built with forgotten misery. When does preserving history require confronting its darkness? And when does that confrontation become exploitative? Picture Sabina's final night, dying from an infection easily treated today, alone in a narrow room beneath one of the most celebrated structures of her age. Did she believe anyone would remember she existed? Could she have imagined that 2 millennia later, archaeologists might uncover fragments from those chambers and speak her name again? History's bleakest truths remind us that progress is not permanent. Civilizations often collapse morally long before their walls crumble. Every era must choose between empathy and efficiency. Rome chose spectacle, and its choices were counted in erased lives. A gladiator's victory became a pass for cruelty. A standard reward transformed into one of Rome's most quietly buried scandals. Hundreds of Dean captives vanished into administrative lists, and one young woman survived only because a single fighter paused long enough to remember he was human. His act did not change the world, but it proved humanity could still flicker even inside Rome's darkest design.